Welcome. Welcome into another episode of the Fergus Spotlight. I'm excited. I've got Annie. You're going to have to help me with your last name here.
Yes, Lafrinier-Richie. It's a complicated one.
It is. So Annie, I'm not even going to try to repeat that last name, but you got it. You heard it. This is awesome that we're getting this episode. This is going to be probably a heavier episode. Maybe we'll try to take as light of approach as possible because it can't just be like a depressing, heavy episode. But we're going to get into a super serious, heavy topic today. You're with Someplace Safe, and your title is the Safe Harbor Navigator.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about human trafficking and the local realities of that industry, the support that Someplace Safe is offering our community, offers our region on that topic. So I know there's a lot of people that are going to be super interested in this topic and how it applies to us locally. So I can't wait to see where this conversation goes, but welcome in.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So where are you from? Where are you based out of?
So I live in Moorhead, Minnesota.
Okay. So that's a regional Someplace Safe. You cover this region then, North Dakota too a little bit?
I don't work directly in North Dakota.
Okay.
So it's a little bit confusing and complicated. I'm funded through the Minnesota Department of Health. And so my role as a Safe Harbor Regional Navigator, I cover a larger chunk of the state than Someplace Safe does.
Okay.
So I provide education outside of Someplace Safe service area in addition to Someplace Safe. So kind of this large chunk, 16 counties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So quite a big region.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the drive, or you were over in Fergus today anyways, but thank you for coming in and sharing your experiences, your information with us. I'm really looking forward to it. So before we get into the meat of the show here, I got a couple sponsors to thank. Atlas Outdoor Services, Outstate Brewing, Stumbeano's Coffee, Victor Lundeen's Liberty Business Systems. We got Wayne Schuett with Century 21 Atwood, and of course, Fergus Home and Hardware. So much appreciation sent out to those supporters of the show, and of course, all you listeners too. So, all right. Well, let's get into this a little bit. Before we get into the actual topic, let's just talk about your background a little bit more and how maybe you ended up in your role. So talk about growing up, anything you can see earlier on in your life that maybe led to this position.
Starting with the big questions. Yeah. Well, so I grew up on the Fond du Lac Reservation. I am Indigenous,
Okay.
and I grew up obviously in a reservation community, kind of seeing a lot of different things happening. I don't think that we would have labeled them the same as we do now, but definitely a lot of trauma in families around me. And I also saw a lot of substance use and just people that were hurting. And I went to college for liberal arts because I knew that I wanted to work with folks who had some history of trauma. I wasn't really sure what that meant, but I knew that I was wanting to serve people. So liberal arts college, University of Minnesota Morris, which was a wonderful experience for me. And through that work, or through my education, I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I kind of dipped my toes in a few different fields. My first job after I graduated from college many, many years ago was at Someplace Safe as an advocate.
Okay.
So that was wonderful. I transitioned from Someplace Safe as an advocate into child welfare, and I saw a lot of really icky and sad things. And firsthand worked with families that were experiencing a lot of really negative things. And it still felt hard. I mean, obviously it's hard, but it felt like I wasn't making the kind of difference that I wanted to make. And so I actually transitioned into this role as a regional navigator for another organization in Minnesota. And I really love it because it gives me an opportunity to provide education on trauma, how it impacts people. We obviously talk about human trafficking because it's all interrelated. And then I also have the opportunity to not only educate people on like what it looks like and how to identify trafficking, but also how we can prevent it. So that's been one of the big things for me, is really being able to participate in local, regional, statewide, and national conversations on what we can do in our communities and our families to prevent trafficking and other types of harm. So that's kind of
what we're here doing today.
Yeah.
That is so cool. And like I said, it's a sad, we're probably going to hear some sad stories, some super sad examples here of things that have happened locally, but I feel an honor. I feel like God has placed this conversation among the people of Fergus Falls at a time when we need it desperately. Not that I know of anything specifically that's going on, but just that's the way timing works, and that's the way awareness works. And so I do feel like this is going to be a divine message that goes out to the people of Fergus Falls about what we can do to actually make an impact here. So I'm excited for it. But obviously the people, everybody kind of hears the national rumors. I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I've gone down the conspiracy rabbit hole in a few different episodes prior. Obviously, you've got the national news, Epstein Island. You have the mystery surrounding what was actually going on out there. You've got the rumors of the Wayfair child's getting sold with cabinets on Wayfair. Those are endless. The Pizzagate scandal, all of that stuff is really endless on a national level, depending on what kind of rabbit holes you want to go down. We're not going to go down any of those rabbit holes today. That's as deep down the national conspiracy hole as we will go. I just really want to talk local facts, local happenings. So Someplace Safe, that organization's background. Do you want to go into that a little bit, how they came to be?
Absolutely. So Someplace Safe has been around since the late 1970s, and we initially started by providing services to people experiencing domestic violence. We also had a shelter in Fergus Falls, so we kind of got our footing here in Fergus Falls, serving specifically female survivors of intimate partner violence, domestic violence. And since that time, we've obviously grown quite a bit. We're now in 9 counties, and we do provide services to folks who have experienced kind of any form of victimization. So it might be intimate partner violence, it might be sexual violence, it might be child abuse, it might be folks who have experienced violent robbery, any type of victimization that individuals in our community have experienced, they can come to us and receive support. We also provide additional support to family members. So, for example, we've had families where their children have experienced sex trafficking. And so then the parents are also needing support and understanding how to navigate the systems and understanding how they can help even support their own kids. And so then we help out parents, we help caregivers, we help other family members, essentially people whose lives have been impacted by some form of victimization. So always helping folks understand the legal system, helping them understand kind of civil remedies, and then also just that emotional support.
So, and obviously this is a super deep conversation about how it happens locally. Obviously that's a big part of what needs to be uncovered is what's actually happening locally. How is, are people were being kidnapped from their parents? The parents oftentimes are involved in some of this activity as well. Do you want to just kind of highlight a little bit about what, I don't want to say a majority or most of the cases we're seeing locally here, but what's not uncommon to see locally here?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, I will say what is uncommon is kidnapping. We get that question a lot. That is something that really doesn't happen, at least in our state. And I think, at least from what I've heard from national partners, is we really don't see a lot of kidnapping. More often it's happening in relationships. And what do those relationships look like? It could be parents trafficking their kids. We do know that across Minnesota, we don't have any regional specific data, but across Minnesota, about 50% to 60% of our cases of child trafficking involve a parent or caregiver. So a lot of times happening in those family situations, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a parent's significant other, maybe it's another relative. We also see it happening in relationships that might be romantic in nature. So maybe it's a boyfriend, maybe it's a girlfriend, some form of significant other. And then one of the biggest things that we're seeing and increasing in really, really quick numbers is that online exploitation. So young people who are talking to strangers online, and maybe not strangers, sometimes it's peers, sometimes it's classmates, but oftentimes it's strangers, and they might be somewhere else in the United States. They might be in other countries. So those numbers are increasing exponentially.
This is a little off topic, but one of the things that sparked in my mind is the whole the OnlyFans platform.
Yes.
The Andrew Tate conspiracy or whatever. Him and his brother got arrested in Romania for managing OnlyFans models, or there's a fine line between what it is that we're talking about when it comes to human trafficking. And I think there's a lot of definitions that are being worked out in every industry as technology arises and grows. But certainly with platforms like that, you have exploitation amongst females where maybe they've joined an agency, but what is that agency really? What does that look like really? A lot of these things that are getting passed off as legal avenues are causing a lot of questions to pop up in society as to what the heck we're doing, right?
Right. Well, and technology moves so much faster than we ever plan for. And so then things are popping up so quickly. And particularly with young people, is that parents and caregivers and schools don't even know what to look out for. And there are things that are happening that we never even guessed would be an issue. So, like, did we think that we would have to talk to fifth graders about strangers soliciting them on Roblox or Minecraft?
Right.
Never. But those are things that happen. So.
As far as, so that's on that, obviously there's more to go into online. We'll maybe get into more of that. But as far as locally here, like when you see industries like let's take snowmobile industry or truck driving industry, truck stops obviously have been prevalent for human trafficking for as long as, truck stops have been around.
Yep.
You've got the oil and gas industry in North Dakota that's regional to us. Is there, are those all outlets that this stuff's happening in?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep, for sure. And I think that this is like a educational moment too, is that, so we definitely know about like the oil boom and that being a place where there was a huge influx of sex trafficking, but we also see, obviously we know like when the Super Bowl was in Minnesota, that there was a huge concern about an influx of trafficking with the Super Bowl, but we also hear about and see and know with our trafficking investigators that there are increases in ads posted online for trafficking for any big events. So if there is like hunting or fishing opener, and there are an influx of folks coming up to their hunting or fishing cabins, and just a larger amount of people in the area, then there's going to be a higher amount of trafficking. So essentially, where there are people, there are more people likely to purchase sex, and then there's going to be more sex trafficking.
And the code words?
The code
Are
words.
there code words?
There are,
There
but
are.
I think they're always changing.
They're always changing.
Just like tech, they're always 2 to 5 steps ahead of everyone else. So, I've heard lots of different codes over the years, but when I talk with young people, they're always saying that that's not what they're hearing. So I think, again, we're behind on technology and terminology.
I guess like I would be interested in like, and you probably know a little bit, like how does that industry actually operate from like it in the physical sense, not like in an online world, but like in the physical sense where these people are getting moved around. I guess that's the whole thing that law enforcement is constantly trying to solve, is how they're doing it, how they're keeping it in their own little world and away from what you guys can figure out, right?
Right.
So, how much do you know about what they're doing and all of that?
Well, so and this is another thing too, is that we have different types of sex trafficking too. So we do see like transit-based sex trafficking, where there may be a trafficker who has several individuals that he is selling for sex. And so then I say he because a lot of times they are male traffickers. And they might be moving them from location to location based on, again, those events, or just because that they know there are buyers in all of these communities. And so then they go from community to community, often by vehicle, often, again, going back to that relationship piece. So there's some sort of coercion or relationship building prior to all of this transit happening. So if they get pulled over by law enforcement, if they maybe get identified, then everyone who's involved is saying, oh no, this is my significant other, or this is my cousin, or this is my uncle. And so then they're not talking about that experience of sex trafficking. What we see more often here in West Central Minnesota is that local sex trafficking. And so then it's often not involving trafficking. Not involving travel, but it's people who live here who are trafficking people that live here and are maybe selling them to people who live here. One thing, though, that we do see, too, more often in our more rural communities in Minnesota is it's not always for cash. So they might not be trading sex for cash. They might be trading sex for drugs or a place to stay or food or formula for their kids or any of those things. So basic needs.
Obviously, like the the prostitution industry is wrapped up in sex trafficking, because it's probably very rare you find somebody who's offering those services that doesn't have somebody who's pulling the strings above them. I would
Absolutely.
guess that's
Yeah.
probably very rare.
Yep.
And so definitely, definitely interesting to see how all that comes together. As far as history goes, like where we're at as a human race, or not our race, but species, we're less barbaric, I think, now than we ever have been, thank goodness. But like, what do you know about the history of like how far back? Obviously, it goes back to the beginning of time. It used to be a lot more socially accepted to move people around as property.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't have
Okay.
a ton to add to that, but I do know that it has been happening forever. And I think that it comes down to like human rights. Like you said, we're at a really great place in time in terms of recognizing human rights and recognizing that humans aren't property and they shouldn't be sold for a variety of things. But I mean, it still happens. So, yeah.
I did have some notes here
Cool.
about some ancient basically like slavery throughout history here. Obviously, the history goes back to Egyptians, Greeks, Romans. They enslaved people, taken to war, potentially building pyramids, things like that. We don't know who actually built the pyramids. Probably the slaves. The word slave actually derives from the Slavic people, which is during the Viking raids between the 8th and 11th centuries. Vikings regularly captured and sold people into slavery, particularly targeting the Slavic peoples. I suppose a lot of that would have been going on in our region here. So that's more of our regional history. The trans-Saharan slave trade, that was African and Middle Eastern societies. There was the Arab slave trade in the 7th to 19th century. Millions of Africans were trafficked to the Middle East, India, and beyond. There's a huge history here with in the United States in general with slaves of African descent, and the periods in history. We're still kind of healing, we're still clearly healing scars from that period of time, the displacement of the native people in our country. So all of that, as far as the abolishment, though, it kind of started, it would have been 1807, 1865. 1807 in Britain, the U.S. in 1865 was when slavery was formally abolished. And so since then, obviously, you've got sex trafficking that continues to exist, major hotspots being Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa. The high demand areas, it says the U.S., Western Europe are probably like the highest demand areas, which is crazy.
It is crazy.
You have forced labor as well. So we're not just talking like necessarily sex trafficking, but the forced labor industry. Do you guys deal with that?
So we do. We recently received funding from the state of Minnesota to provide services to victims of labor trafficking. And this is a lot harder to identify, and it's a lot harder to get connected with individuals experiencing it, because a lot of times they're being labor trafficked on site. So they might never leave their workplace. So it's very hard. And there've been some really big cases in Minnesota over the last year where we're hearing stories about individuals who are being labor trafficked on farms.
Do you have any thing you can share?
Tell me more about that.
Or can you share any stories about local here in Minnesota, either labor traffic or maybe I want to hear some stories too about some things that have happened.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, and I can talk about different examples that we've seen regionally, but then this big case that happened, it was on a number of dairy farms owned by one specific farmer, and I think they just settled it for wage theft. But it was very much a labor trafficking situation where this farmer had a number of laborers working on his multiple farms who are not allowed to leave the site. They were staying in really unsafe work conditions. They had there are pictures that different newspapers have kind of posted from those work conditions where there was cockroaches all over, really, really filthy living spaces. They weren't able to leave. They weren't able to talk to other individuals, and they were not being paid fairly. So it's kind of a perfect storm of all of the different labor trafficking things. And we've heard stories about that in other factories and farms across Minnesota. But again, so often folks are afraid to come forward and tell what they're experiencing.
Right.
They may not know that they're being labor trafficked. They may need the money for family, or there may be immigration issues. And so all of those things kind of coming together make it really hard for folks to step forth and say, this is happening to me.
Right.
We do see labor trafficking happening in smaller industries as well. So like maybe a family-owned restaurant where they're forcing folks to, or they're forcing their children to work really long hours in unsafe conditions. Maybe they're not paying them, really just not following labor laws. And then, of course, that element of force, so they don't have any options. But there have been many different kind of examples, and I personally have worked with folks who have been like brought from different states, and so then they responded to an ad online for a work opportunity that pays really well, and so then their employer pays for them to fly to this state. They provide them with an apartment, and they say, you're going to work this many hours a week, and this is how much I'm going to pay you. And then they start working, end up working significantly more hours than they were initially expected to, and then they're not getting paid because they have these moving debts that are really never being filled. So with that individual, it was this, well, you have to pay for the flight. So I'm going to take all of the cost of the flight out of your paycheck. Oh, well, now you have to pay for your apartment. And so then this individual worked there for 6 months and never got paid and was not able to leave because they had all of these end goal debts that were just continuing to move and move and move.
Right. That really is like there's a fine line.
It really is.
Because
yeah.
I'll tell you, I mean, I lived in one of the most beautiful places in the world by choice. But when I was out there as a lift operator in Vail, Colorado, out of high school or whatever, I was fresh out of high school. Their experience is, or their motto is an experience of a lifetime, right? That's their motto. This is Vail Resorts, right? You get out there, you're in employee housing. They know exactly how much money you need to make to eat, stay there, live, exist, and but not have enough to like leave, or you can't quite ever make enough to get ahead and leave. You're kind of stuck in their little system.
Yep.
And so I know that seems like ridiculous to tie that into human trafficking or forced labor, but I think that it's easy to see how that becomes a gray area, super slippery slope where it may be hard to identify that you've been put in a situation where you can't escape the labor that you're in.
Absolutely, yeah, that end debt. And I think, so we call that debt bondage, right? So they have this debt that continues to move, but there's always that element. In order for something to be considered labor trafficking, it has to have force, fraud, or coercion. So that coercion is somebody feels like they have no other options. Correct. Maybe your employer is saying, listen, if you don't continue working, I know you damaged this equipment, and I'm going to say that you owe me $10,000 for this damaged equipment. And you're like, oh, I don't have any money. There's nowhere I can go. Even if it's not legal, you're thinking I'm going to have to keep doing this job because I feel like I have no other option. So, and of course, there's always force, not always, but like if there is physical force involved too, then people are afraid to leave. So those are the distinctions, but you're right. It is super gray. And we do hear a lot. I used to work in northern Minnesota in a very similar role, and we heard a lot of potential labor trafficking in resorts along the North Shore, but never anyone who was saying, yes, this is happening to me. Just this idea that people are coming into these beautiful communities with the opportunity of a lifetime, and then having to pay off these just surmounting debts.
Obviously, when it comes to forced labor, I think the pinnacle of it is like the bottom of the supply chain for your cell phone, like the cobalt mines. I think in different parts of the world, those are the realities that, like, when you look at the global economic picture, it's super, super sad. And it's almost like the world as a whole is set up to exploit labor from a certain region of the world or certain peoples of the world. And to me, I see like, it almost feels like we as a country are like trafficking this group of people to make stuff for us or go mine cobalt or do this stuff.
Right. At very low prices.
At very,
because
very
we want
little
a
to
deal.
no money.
Yes, the deal is very important to us. Yes.
Yeah. So definitely forced labor. There's many different ways that people can be exploited or trafficked. So certainly forced labor. Oh man, this is interesting. I didn't know that even this was on my sheet here. Organ trafficking. No. Selling organs? We're not doing that around here, are we?
So I have never heard of that actually happening. I do know that there are certain individuals that feel very strongly about us talking about it. And I don't mean us as in someplace safe, but service providers, law enforcement, that it should be a law. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. We don't see it at someplace safe.
Okay.
We've never heard any examples of it. And that would be what our partner agencies would say too. So it's not that it's not happening, but if it is, it's really underground.
Right. Okay. Well, and I do think it's worth saying and worth expressing here. We are on 12:50 a.m. We're not live right now, but the people are getting this. They're hearing this conversation. So, there's a lot of speculation going on. Obviously, you're sharing some stories of like real experiences, things we know, but definitely like we're not out here to say this is happening, but I'm going to I'll speculate on anything maybe, but certainly good to know like the legal disclaimer there that like we're not accusing, we're not making any accusations or anything over this. Protect ourselves legally there. So,
yes.
But society has been changing. Obviously, we're cracking down on laws. We've made significant strides. You see Ashton Kutcher. You see these celebrity movements. So what the movie, The Sound of Freedom?
Yeah.
I didn't see the movie.
I didn't either.
You didn't either?
No.
Okay.
It was a personal choice.
It was. Okay.
I try to not, when I'm not working, I try to not inundate myself with traumatic stories because there's so much during the day. When I go home, I'm like, I would rather watch a cartoon. Like, let's watch The Simpsons, something I can laugh at versus more stories of individuals who experience things that I see at work. So, but I have heard feedback from the film.
And accurate depiction of what goes on?
I've heard that it's somewhat accurate, somewhat sensational. So, and I think really, and that's what we think about with Hollywood, right? Is that when people are producing movies, they're making them interesting. They want them to be engaging. They want them to be sensational because that's what people want to see. So, to take some liberties or to make them more fantastic is really filmmaking, right? Not to say that what happened in that film is not an accurate experience for a lot of people. It just doesn't necessarily look like what it looks like here.
Okay. Do you have any, do you have any Fergus Falls stories?
I don't have any specific ones that I can share, but I can say that it does happen here. We do have advocates across all of Someplace Safe's region, 9 counties in West Central Minnesota, who are working with trafficking victims all the time. So, and I will also add that like as a note of pride, because we have an awesome program, but also kind of very sad that we often see the highest numbers of trafficking outside of the metro here in our part of the state. And not because it's happening more, I think because we have folks who are better able to identify it. Maybe we're having more conversations with youth in schools where they're coming forward and saying they need help. But on average, we're working with anywhere between 90 and 150 young people across this 9-county rural region of Minnesota every year.
Dang.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And we have had cases of trafficking and exploitation in every single community in all of our 9 counties. So it is happening here, and it is happening in all of our towns.
As far as our local branch here, we have the Someplace Safe thrift store. That is, and maybe we can get into a little bit more about the structure of Someplace Safe here and what you guys are doing to impact and make an impact on all this. But the thrift stores is kind of your retail front chain for all of your different locations. It's a nice spot for people to come, anyone in the community to come and shop and get good things at a cheap price. And then obviously it's a safe landing spot for people to come in and stop and get help. Yeah,
absolutely. It does. It's definitely a place where folks can come in and ask for services and support. It's also, our thrift stores are super fantastic because it's another opportunity for us to help equip survivors with things that they need too. So not that we would never purchase new items for people, because we do that too. But for example, maybe we have a family who's experiencing domestic violence. Maybe they had to flee their home. They're in a new state. They have nothing. And so you have maybe 7 kids. And so that's a lot of items of clothing. They can come into the thrift store working with an advocate, and they can receive anything they need through the thrift store, which is wonderful.
And I'm a thrift shopper.
Same.
I like thrifting. I'm a big thrifter. good prices at Someplace Safe. Like
Yes.
really, really good prices when you compare it to like a Goodwill or some other thrift stores.
Yes.
I think you guys do a very, very good job of pricing things that like it makes you feel like it's worth it to go to a thrift store to get something. Sometimes I go to a thrift store and I'm like, oh, is it really even worth it to be here with how much they're charging for all this stuff? Like,
Yes.
it's a good cause, but no, I really commend Someplace Safe on their competitive low thrift pricing.
Yeah.
So how many stores are there then? Fergus has one, obviously. Our location is downtown, kind of behind downtown there, correct?
Yes. Yep.
By Fiesta Brava.
Yes.
Yep, right there
It's
by
like,
Fiesta Brava.
okay, I can't remember the name.
You're like, I don't live in Fergus. Don't test me on this.
No, but
yeah.
I have eaten there.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Kind of right in that little strip mall.
Yes.
There. So we have a location. You're from Moorhead. I'm assuming
Yeah.
9 counties. Does every one of those counties have a thrift store?
Not everyone. We
Okay.
have 3 thrift stores. So we have one in Morris, Minnesota, and that we've had a thrift store in Morris for quite some time. So that one's been there for a while, well established. We also have one in Alexandria as well. Yep.
Awesome.
And Alexandria has been there for a while too. Our Fergus Falls location is our newest thrift store.
And you mentioned mainly that exists to sort of have a way to facilitate victims. And it may be a little bit of money, but it can't be what drives your guys' bottom line. Where does your guys' funding come from?
Oh, all sorts of places. We have a lot of diversified funding. So we do, I would say the vast majority of the funding that we receive is through grants through through the state of Minnesota, sorry. Okay. So we get a lot of funding through the Office of Justice programs. And then the Safe Harbor is a special designated funding pocket really just for sex trafficking and labor trafficking services. And so then we have that funding. We have a little bit of federal funding. Of course, we make money from our thrift stores. And then we also have charitable donors. So we have so many different community members who donate money, time, or even gifts and different items for survivors to our offices. So they are a huge part of ensuring that our work continues and that also that folks in our communities get help and support too.
Do you guys work mainly with women? Is that a good question to ask?
That's
women,
a great question.
Men?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we will work. We work with folks of all genders.
Right.
And I think initially, of course, most of the domestic violence movement was really specifically for women and children. But we've seen over the past 15, 20 years that people experience violence and victimization regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status. And so we're seeing everyone essentially. Folks from all backgrounds, all genders are coming to us with experiences of victimization. So it's less common for men to experience intimate partner violence. Not that they aren't experiencing it, but they very well could be being harassed by a coworker or having other things happening to them in the community where they're experiencing harm. So it might not be that traditional domestic violence in a relationship, but they're still having some other form of victimization.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do people come to the point where they actually end up with you guys for help? Lots of different avenues. Yeah. I'm sure that people find their way to you guys. Some people walk into the thrift store and get help. Some people probably have. Do you guys get involved with welfare checks and law enforcement? Like if you get tipped off to something by someone, you'll go investigate or get involved with law enforcement? And
so we don't investigate. We don't go to homes, but if law enforcement gets called to a home and they're concerned about somebody's safety, they definitely refer to us as well. Okay. And that can be like a warm handoff. They might call us while they're with the individual, or they might say, here's a phone number for you to call, depending on what the victim survivor is comfortable with.
And then the process, let's just take it. I'm somebody who's hearing this message in Fergus Falls and I need help and I'm going to walk into Someplace Safe.
Yeah.
What process am I going to go through? What is that intake going to look like?
Yeah. So it's generally a conversation. So they're coming in, they're meeting with an advocate, they're having a conversation, talking about what they've experienced and then also what they're looking for. What kind of support do they need? Maybe they want to file a harassment restraining order. So the person who is harassing them no longer does so because of a court process saying that they can't have contact or the contact that they can have is really limited. It might be that they don't want any legal support and they just want help getting a new place to stay or leaving their abusive partner, or like we've had folks who have not really wanted a ton of services that they're equipped to kind of take care of themselves, but they have pets that they don't know what to do with. And so then they reach out to us saying, hey, I have this place to stay. I can get there, but I don't know what to do with my dog. And so then we help kind of find resources to take care of that pet or shelter that pet until this person is able to safely get them. So kind of anything that they need, we get from that initial intake conversation.
Do you guys partner with people for housing or like temporary housing and all of that stuff?
Yeah. Yep. We do have programming within Someplace Safe where we're able to help house folks short-term or long-term. And we did actually just receive additional funding to really increase housing opportunities and availability for individuals all across our region as well. So we have a pretty good amount of funding and support for people who might be looking for first month's, last month's rent, any of those kind of things with relation to like a domestic violence experience. So helping kind of remove those barriers that a lot of survivors are facing when they're trying to flee violent relationships. Yeah. Sorry, it's like stumbling on my words there.
What is that, I guess, like, let's talk a little bit more about some of the signs or what it looks like, or helping identify the situations that maybe you have found yourself in, or the situations that you maybe see a friend or an associate in. What are the signs? Obviously, another thing on here, we touched on a little bit, there's the grooming and coercion aspect of it, right? You have a figure of authority, whether it be a religious figure who had access to this person as an adolescent, was in a position of authority over them. That obviously is a person that has a relationship with a child, and then as they transition into adulthood, they can get them to do things that maybe seem normal or don't raise questions with this individual because of the relationship that they have with this person. So let's talk about the signs. I mean, grooming if you want, but just in general, the signs and what to look for.
Yeah, specifically for I'll talk more about sex trafficking because that's probably the most common type of trafficking that we're going to be seeing here, and that happens to young people. So what I would say, particularly when we're talking about youth, is thinking about how they interact with others. So what I think about, like, if it's a youth who's maybe experiencing trafficking or being groomed for trafficking in a romantic relationship, I think about young people who are just so excited to talk about these relationships. And like thinking back on our own first relationships, like I know I told my mom everything about boys that I liked. So if it's a young person that maybe is starting to see somebody and they're not talking about things, so maybe they're being more secretive, maybe there's some kind of change in behavior. So maybe they've lost interest in things that they used to be interested in. Maybe they're hiding phone conversations. Maybe they're sneaking out and going somewhere to meet up with this person. They're not telling anyone where they're going. I think there's a lot of those kind of behavioral changes that are happening. And not to say that when young people are sneaking out, or maybe they're being less honest or open with their parents, that they're all being trafficked, because we know that is not the case, that there could be something else happening. But that those are usually the red flags, is that huge change in behavior, really secretive about where they're going or who they're talking to, really secretive kind of about what's happening to them. There may be some signs or symptoms of substance use. We do see a lot of connection between using substances and trafficking and exploitation.
Oftentimes, if you're being exploited, you're going to cope. You're going to have a coping mechanism of some point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and we have our state director of Safe Harbor did a research project on the use of substances in sex trafficking in Minnesota with young people, and found that, yes, it's a coping skill, but it's also something that traffickers use to kind of take advantage of young people too. So maybe these young people are already using drugs. And so then this trafficker maybe is also selling drugs and is saying, if you want to keep getting this marijuana, vape pen, whatever, I need you to do something for me in exchange.
All right. Okay. I can't let you drop that line without defending the substance a little bit. Seems like there's some substances that would maybe exploit people a little bit more than marijuana, but yes. I'll just leave it at that.
No, it's true. It's true. But so what we found in this research project is that it's depends. The substances depend on age. So like
absolutely, yeah.
12-year-olds cannot legally purchase or use
Correct.
marijuana. So traffickers are using marijuana with 12-year-olds.
But that's the conversation to be had about the gateway drug. People
Totally.
talk about marijuana as a gateway drug a lot, and whatever it is that people are using to, come have this experience with me, this older person that, the world hasn't let you have this experience. I can't believe the world hasn't let you have this experience in life yet.
Yeah.
Come enjoy this thing with me.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden that's the end.
That's the end. Yep.
In that case, absolutely marijuana
Yeah.
is in that conversation.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yes. So that's a very good point.
Right.
It's not just like, I'm 25 years old. Oh, you have a joint. Then I'm going to be trafficked now.
or right, like, I really need another joint. I need to go get my fix. You know,
it's very much that cool older person. Like, come out and hang out. Let's go to a party. Let's do this. And experience these cool adult things with us.
Yep.
So that we see that. And again, the substances differ by age. So as kids get older, then the drugs that traffickers are using are heavier. And then we think of that like addiction piece. So
So obviously that's a big one to look out for. Substance use.
Yes.
Keeping a tight lip about the relationships or whatever you're in.
Yep.
What else from like a society standpoint? Like I picture like, look out for the truckers at Big Chief trading people around or,
Well, so what we've seen and heard is generally the truckers are not the traffickers. Generally, they're the buyers. Generally, traffickers are somebody else who may be bringing people to the gas stations to sell them for sex. But I think really beyond substance abuse, those behavioral changes, relationships, maybe. And so I can share some examples of what I've seen in nearby communities. Like we had young people who were in foster care and they were not being trafficked by their foster parent. They were being trafficked by somebody else. And so they were going home every day. They were kind of following all the rules, but they were leaving school at certain times of the day and they were leaving school without permission. And it took kind of a while for all of the adults involved to figure out what was happening. And it turned out they were leaving school during the lunch hour, during adult lunch hour, because their trafficker was setting up dates for them over lunch. And so then they're sneaking out of school for 2 hours because they're being forced to have sex with folks who are on their lunch hour and then coming back to school. So just kind of looking at those weird changes. Maybe it's young people who are running away for a little while and then coming back, right? So maybe they're leaving their homes from 11 p.m. until 2 a.m. and then they're coming back. So just those kind of weird things that don't seem right, but you're not really sure what they are. That's a big one. Also, the other big thing that we see for people of all ages is if it's somebody who's being trafficked by a romantic partner, is it almost always looks like domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And so then maybe they have bruises, maybe they are in a relationship with somebody and it seems like that person has a lot more power and control over them. So we're seeing all of those symptoms. We're not seeing what's happening kind of behind closed doors. So that withdrawn or kind of scared behavior, maybe they're combative or angry because of their experiences. So I have seen in my profession, not just in my role as regional navigator, but when I was in child welfare, was that we often misidentified trafficking situations as domestic violence. That there was within relationships, particularly when I was in child welfare, is there would be two parents and the dad would be trafficking mom and also their kids. And they came in because of like a big fight, right? So they came into child welfare because mom and dad got into a fight in front of the kid. Kid reported it to the school. And then we're able to see that mom and dad got into a fight. So we're seeing kind of all of those things, but not the sex trafficking.
Right. That's really interesting. My next episode, I think the way it's going to work out is I'm bringing in Melanie Cole, who she's on our school board here.
Awesome.
But you know Melanie, she works with I don't know exactly what she does, but I think she works with child abuse cases locally here. Like I said, I'm going to find out more exactly about what she does, but I think that's probably going to be a little bit of the topic of the next episode. So I'm just going into the gauntlet of like serious conversations here, but
dark stuff,
but really important. And when I think about the Fergus Spotlight and what this platform is, and my goal has always been to paint the picture of our community, the whole picture of our community. You know, you can't leave out the stuff that we don't want to recognize as what's happening here. I want to say when I did my city council run, we were talking to some city officials, and they brought up that child abuse is like the number one crime that happens here in Fergus Falls. It's like almost one a day or something. Like it's like domestic abuse. It's like the numbers were ridiculously higher than I could have ever guessed here locally. So yeah, definitely it's happening here. Do you have anything on the numbers as far as out of Otter Tail County here? Can you share anything like that at all?
I don't, but okay. we don't have specific to county. It's just really our whole service area for sex trafficking.
Right. And obviously there's public record. I mean, you could do your research as far as the cases that have been prosecuted here in Otter Tail County and all of that. So what about, and if there's anything you want to add to how people can get help, obviously we'll get contact information and all of that in the episode description. But what does like the future look like? You know,
what's a great question. So ideally, my dream future for this work is that we're really able to go out there and provide more education. I would really like for us, not just Someplace Safe, but us and all of our collaborative partners, law enforcement, schools, child welfare, to provide a lot more education to kids when they're young, and to provide ongoing education so that they know from a very early age what a healthy relationship looks like, and like body safety and body autonomy, because we know a lot of times that people who experience sex trafficking have also experienced childhood sexual abuse. So there's kind of things that are happening in their early life that impacts their ability to see whether or not a relationship is safe later in life. So I would like for us to be able to provide a lot more education on that. I would love to be able to connect with more youth. I'd also love to be able to connect with more parents and caregivers so that we can provide more education there, not just on what does it look like, how do we stop it, but how do we support others, right? So what if we're concerned, maybe one of our neighbors, there's something suspicious happening with neighbors. So how do we support those kids, and how do we really wrap around an entire community and show our community that we don't want this happening here, that it's not okay to do this, it's not okay to harm kids, it's not okay to harm adults, and that we'll provide for each other and support each other.
And then like the call to action as far as like people goes is should we be setting up like some sting operations? I mean, there's got to be some things that we could do here locally to
I think
help exploit some of what's going on.
Like sting operations, I think law enforcement always want to do that. I know that there's a lot of cost associated with them, so that can be difficult. But I think just as community members, keeping your eyes open, looking out for things that are suspicious, also reporting if there are things that are suspicious, and if they're concerned for a community member, definitely reach out to them and have them contact us for support. Like, we're always happy to. And one thing that's important too with our Safe Harbor funding specifically in Someplace Safe is that we can work with people before they've been victimized. So if there are young people, maybe they've had maybe, I don't know how I would want to say this, chaotic upbringing. Maybe they're just experiencing extreme poverty. Maybe there's no chaos, but they don't have enough to meet their basic needs. That, like, these are all risk factors for trafficking, and we're able to provide support for folks experiencing risk factors of trafficking. So we would love to get in there and help connect people with resources and the things that they need before they're exploited. So if they have neighbors, if they have friends, if they know people who have some of these risk factors, to reach out to us. We're happy to come in and stop the harm before it happens.
Right. I'm super, in general, really heavily against like government, Big Brother is watching like all your information. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you pair up Google and Apple, and they have the best predictive analysis model that could ever exist. I mean, I almost guarantee between these major tech companies, the algorithm exists to predict these crimes. The algorithm exists to statistically say this person is in a high risk category for this crime. I think that's where it's like, you got to tote that fine line between like the government being all up in your business. But when it comes to life and when it comes to protecting innocent life, it's like, I think some of those conversations are worth having as far as the technology that we can take advantage of in predictive analysis and trying to prevent some of this stuff before it happens.
I have never thought about that before, and that is really valid.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's accurate,
Yep.
I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everything at the end of the day is a statistic, and you end up somewhere. Statistically, there's a reason you're there.
Oh, yes.
So I do believe that, and I'm sure that the powers that be are probably working on something like that. I don't know.
I mean, wouldn't it be great to predict whether or not someone's going to get harmed and then say, let's help you before that? Yeah.
What is that? They made a TV series about that. I forget the name of the show, but it was all about that, right? It was this predictive algorithm that basically predicted a crime, and then they stopped the crime before it could happen. And so we got to be careful with how far down that road we want to go, but certainly that's where it will begin, with the government saying this is something that we have the ability to take care of, and we can all agree that this is something we don't want happening. So we're going to use this thing to stop this. But then you give them an inch and they take a mile, and all of a sudden they're predicting every crime you're ever going to make, and you're under a lens and all of that. So,
yes.
I see us facing those hurdles in the future as legislative hurdles when it comes to how we're going to predict crimes and,
absolutely,
and all that stuff. So
also, I'm trying to think, is that Blade Runner? Have you seen Blade Runner? Is that
Blade
something
Runner.
along the lines of that?
I haven't seen Blade Runner.
I saw it in college, and that was a long time ago, but I feel like there's maybe
I
might be going off on a limb that is inaccurate.
Person of Interest was maybe the series that I'm thinking of. I want to say it's Person of Interest. I could be wrong, but
sounds great.
Yeah, there's plenty of shows out there about technology taking over and predicting. True. But I guess to kind of like cap off this conversation a little bit, what do you feel like we didn't touch on today? What do you feel like that you would want a little bit more information out there about?
That's a great question. Well, we talked about risk factors. We talked about different ways that young people and adults might get caught in trafficking, often through relationships. I think it's important to note that, again, I know I mentioned families, that families is unfortunately where it's most often happening here. I think one of the big things that all of us in Minnesota learned recently, all of us in the Safe Harbor Network recently learned, is that, like, statistically, as you say, numbers across the United States, the most common age for kids being trafficked by parents are between the ages of 4 and 8. So that's why when I talk about prevention, I'm thinking like really early. So a lot of times schools are saying, hey, we have 16 and 17-year-olds. We want you to come in and talk to this issue about. It's too late. They've already experienced it, or they're already in exploitive relationships. So like we need to do early education.
And then it's like, yikes. Then the question comes up, like, how do you have that conversation with kindergartners, preschoolers? How do you do that?
Body safety, always body safety, healthy relationships. Like this is where it's okay. Like these are the types of physical contact that are okay if it feels good. Like if you're okay with somebody giving you a high five or a hug, these are the places where it's not okay for people to touch you. So like really, really basic education, but helping them know that, because they may have caregivers who are telling them the exact opposite, which is unfortunate. Right. So it kind of all ties together when we think about like child abuse prevention is also sex trafficking prevention.
Right. Well, thank you for your willingness to sit down and share this topic. Obviously, it's your job to do so. I'm super honored to have been a part of this conversation and a part of sharing this with our community. Before I get you out of here, I ask all my guests, this isn't necessarily, it used to be the business spotlight, Fergus Falls business spotlight, and I haven't really reworked this question since, but I ask people best business advice. So I don't know if you're much of an entrepreneur or business, but we'll reform that question for you. I won't ask you business advice, but best like practical advice for dealing with this issue of trafficking, human trafficking.
Oh God, that's a hard one. I think what I've seen is that communities who come together, support each other, take care of each other, and have tons of healthy opportunities for activities, community events are our healthiest and safest communities. So just remembering that it may not feel like hosting a book club night at the library is preventative, but really creating those opportunities and allowing everyone to participate is huge prevention. And it's also huge for reintegration and healing. So if folks have already experienced victimization, they can come to these community events and feel like they're a part of something that matters and that they matter. And I think just looking at the ways that we connect with each other and how to connect better or keep connecting well.
Yeah, I like that. I just came off an episode with the library, and we talked about why the library matters.
Yes.
And there's so many reasons why the library matters, but certainly that sense of community, that's like the ultimate safe harbor place is the library for people, you know?
Yeah.
They talk a lot about how they oftentimes, maybe you work with the library a little bit, times that people come into the library at a very, very low point in their life. Lots of different reasons people end up in the library. So certainly I hope our community hears those words and takes that very, very seriously, like investing. And we do a very good job of it. I don't want to take anything away from our community. I think that from what I've seen here, we have so many nonprofit organizations, so many people contributing to the arts scene, so many people hosting events, so many people doing things and providing outlets for people. So definitely we keep doing what we're doing with that, but recognize that the reason we do that stuff is to prevent the void being filled with crap.
Yes.
So
well said.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, thank you very much. I'm certainly going to keep your information, and we'll maybe talk again at some point if we want more insight into this topic. Maybe get somebody, obviously this is a big part of what Someplace Safe does. We didn't talk too much about the organization. There's probably a little bit more to Someplace Safe than just trafficking.
Just a lot.
Just a lot more. So maybe I'll get another Someplace Safe episode at some point, but I just, I really, really appreciate your time today.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you guys for listening. Thank you very much to the sponsors: Atlas Outdoor Services, Outstate Brewing, Stumbeano's, Victor Lundeen's, Fergus Home and Hardware, Liberty Business Systems, and Wayne Schuett with Century 21 Atwood. Have a good afternoon.